You're listening to the Whole Hog Football Podcast, sponsored by Kendall King, bringing you the latest news, position analysis, and more. Here's your hosts, Matt Jones with Andrew Joseph and Scotty Bordelon.
Arkansas with a big loss to Alabama over the weekend. The Razorbacks now 3-2 overall, 1-2 in SEC play. It doesn't get any easier. They go to Mississippi State and BYU the next 2 weeks. Both of those teams are ranked in this week's top 25. Alabama moved into the number 1 spot for winning on the road in Arkansas, but the Razorbacks fell out of the top 25. Interesting how that works. Matt Jones with Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph of WholeHogSports.com. It went about the way that we thought it was going to go when we talked about it, the game on the podcast last week. For Arkansas, just too many big plays allowed defensively. And, when you do that, you really put a lot of stress on your offense to be able to keep up. And I thought Arkansas's offense played well, especially given the way that Alabama had played over the first 4 games. They'd given up 29 points in 4 games. Arkansas scored 26 against them. But when you're giving up all of the big plays that Arkansas gave up, Scotty, it's just really an untenable situation to be able to hang with a team that good.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I maybe expected a little bit more from Arkansas's offense. And obviously we were kind of unaware that Warren Thompson was not going to be available in that game. That was a guy that, he's shown deep ball ability in the past. I don't know exactly what kind of a difference he would have made in like the big picture outlook of the game, but that's a weapon that you have on the perimeter. If he can secure passes, that you have at your disposal, and he wasn't there. And I think it allowed a guy like Ketron Jackson to step in and, make a case for himself to maybe get a little bit more run on the perimeter. But I think Arkansas, and we talk about this, like I sit right in between you guys, both, most games, especially at home. And I think I said to both of you guys a number of times during the game that Arkansas is like the most 2nd and 8 or 2nd and 9 and 3rd and 8 and 3rd and 9 team that I've ever seen. It's like they're really predictable, I think, kind of on 2nd down when 1st down, goes for a minimal gain or no gain, or they go backward. And I just think that, they're a little bit predictable on 2nd down, and teams sniff out that inside zone read that they run a lot on 2nd down, and it puts them at, in disadvantageous spots on 3rd down where you're needing, a majority of the 10 yards to get to a fresh set of downs. That I think was the most, I guess, frustrating thing that I saw the other day. And it just seemed like Arkansas in general, especially in the first half offensively, was just kind of a tick off. And KJ was missing a couple of his throws. Like he had, Jaden Hazelwood and maybe Ketron Jackson. I know Matt Landers for sure. Landers was targeted 10 times the other day, had 2 catches. So that kind of tells you where Arkansas's passing efficiency was. Just thought they were just a tick off. And Sam, I think he said that, maybe they were still trying to flush the Texas A&M game in the first half against Alabama. You got to be, hyper focused on Alabama to be able to contend with them. And I think in the second half, they were a little bit more on the same page, but the big plays defensively were just backbreakers, man. And then 3rd down was a killer. And Alabama, I think, racked up nearly 40% of its total yards on offense on like 5 plays on 3rd down, which is just, you can't overcome that.
You look at Alabama's big plays, the 5 biggest plays that they had in the game accounted for 326 yards. It's going to be hard to beat anybody when you're doing that. I mean, their quarterback had a 77-yarder on a 3rd and 15 that I thought was really the key play in the game. Jahmyr Gibbs, their running back, was the SEC Offensive Player of the Week because he had touchdown runs of 76 and 72 yards where the cutback lanes were just left wide open for him. And then in the passing game, Bryce Young, before he got injured, had a couple of big gainers, had a 53-yarder, had a 47-yarder to Isaiah Bond and Kobe Prentice. And we talked about this a lot, and I think we're going to be talking about it a lot more as the season goes along. The safety play without Jalen Catalon is really, really poor. And it's a glaring weakness for this team. And I think it's going to be a deal where, if Arkansas it's gonna be one of two things. Arkansas is either going to really continue to struggle giving up these big plays, or they're going to have to maybe change their identity defensively to maybe start dropping more back into coverage, like what we've seen the first couple of years under Barry Odom. Because I just, the safety play, it's not getting any better. This isn't a situation where you're just playing the wrong horses. It's that I don't know that they've got the horses in the barn to be able to stop these teams, at least with the type of scheme that we've seen over the first 5 weeks.
Yeah, I did a kind of a little short dive into Arkansas's recent recruiting in the secondary and kind of see how well those members are panning out. And outside of Miles Slusher, and if you want to count Nudie as a recruit from the transfer portal, I would count those two guys as recent hits, but they've got a lot more misses like Chase Lowry, Trent Gordon, Nick Turner. And then you've got your question marks of guys that haven't really played yet, and Keywan Parker, Jalen Lewis, and Anthony Brown, the two freshmen. But I mean, it would be a little bit concerning to me that they're not playing after this secondary has struggled this much. So, I mean, if they were the guys that were going to come in and turn it around, you would expect them to be seeing the field by now.
And Chase Lowry's a guy that he's not even playing defensive back anymore. Like when the first day of classes started during the preseason, we saw Chase Lowry in a number 87 jersey running with the wide receivers. And so I think you're right on there. Some of the guys have just, maybe not panned out the way that you had hoped. I just think I think you're almost to the point where you've got a guy in the secondary and Simeon Blair as a captain, kind of replacing Jalen Catalon. And there was a point early in the game, may have been Alabama's first series, where he goes up and he assists on a tackle and he's super hyped about it. And then I leaned over to Andrew and I was like, what do you think Alabama's going to do here? I said, I bet they go after Simeon Blair. And then they did for like 38 or 40 yards. And it's just like, it's almost like if we know what is coming with the opposing team's offense and like who they're targeting on Arkansas's defense, I mean, I would imagine that Arkansas has to have some kind of awareness that's coming. But then there's like Miles Slusher played maybe one of his best games, as a Razorback against Texas A&M. But I mean, the step up in the level of competition, I think, kind of caught up with him too. And I guess he'd been dealing with a nagging calf injury. Sam Pittman said on Monday that it was, quote, jacked up pretty good. So that's not good. I mean, they really need him to stay healthy. And it doesn't seem like he's trending in that direction. I think somebody asked in one question about the status of Warren Thompson and Miles Slusher, and I think Sam said that Warren was in a better position than Slusher was. So that's not what you want to hear, when your defensive backfield has been really suspect to this point in the year, and you're getting ready to face a really pass-heavy offense. It's not ideal, but I would expect Arkansas to play, a lot of 3-down linemen, drop 8. I mean, you probably just have to figure out this week who your best 8 DBs are and get them on the field and just tell them that, we're going to need you for every rep that you can play healthy. Because I don't know if they drop 8 I guess you're going to have Bumper and Andrew Sanders out there more than likely, but so you got to find your best 6 and just kind of figure it out, man. It's kind of a secondary that to this point has already been patched together, and then you add some more injuries to it. Like, you don't have Ladarius Bishop for the rest of the year. He didn't play well when he was on the field. Miles Slusher's down, and Latavius Burney is another guy that I don't think we're talking about very much. I think he's a little bit more injured than we think with that ankle, if I had to guess. It's just the outlook is just not real good heading into this week, given all the struggles in the secondary, the troubles you're having in man coverage, the tackling issues, and just getting guys to the ground, keeping them in front. Like, that's just that right there. I made it sound like it's a lot, and it really is. Like, I just don't know exactly what the answer is moving forward, but Barry Odom's he's gonna work for his paycheck this year.
Mississippi State goes into this game this weekend. They rank 2nd nationally in passing attempts with 48. They rank 7th nationally in passing yards at about 347 yards per game. And this is not going to be like what Alabama did. We were talking during the game. If you've got that going for you over the top, if you're Alabama, why aren't you throwing it more? It was really the third quarter, or the fourth quarter, I'm sorry, whenever Alabama was able to really, rack up the rushing yards. I think they had close to 250 rushing yards in the third quarter. Most of them came on those, big those 3 big 70+ yard runs. Mississippi State, they're not going to run the ball. They're going to throw it, and they're going to throw it, and they're going to throw it. And this is, like kind of to your point, Scotty, this is going to be kind of like a make or break type weekend. I feel like for the secondary, they're really going to have to step up and show what they're made of, because Mississippi State's going to challenge them over and over and over again through the air.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And Arkansas, they better have flushed the Alabama game. I mean, it's got to be behind them. I know anytime that you feel like you're out of a game, then you get back into a game and you kind of play that roller coaster game against a team that is probably, you go into it thinking they're a little bit superior to you in a lot of ways, and then they beat you, put you away pretty soundly toward the end of the game. You got to flush it. And you look at Arkansas's upcoming schedule, it's 2 more top 25 teams, and both of them are on the road. And then you go to Auburn. Right now Auburn on the schedule is looking like your get right game, but Arkansas needs a get right game sooner than that, or their season could honestly turn into a tailspin. Especially when you look at the other side of the ball and you don't exactly know what KJ Jefferson's status is for this weekend's game. And then there's some, I don't want to say it's turmoil, but there's a little bit of uncertainty in terms of whether Cade Fortin is the backup quarterback and can effectively run the offense. Sam a lot of times has said that he's really good in 2-minute situations, but what's he like when he's like fully your guy? And I don't think anybody outside of the people who watch practice all the time know the answer to that. And then what is Malik Hornsby's role on the team? I mean, if he's not the backup quarterback and he's not being used at receiver, I mean, what role does he have? And so there's questions on just about every phase of the game for Arkansas right now, including punting, as they gave up a couple more returns last week. Like they just, the outlook's not great unless they get some things right. And I think the only thing that is going to maybe help them right away is just getting some people back healthy. But I mean, we'll just have to kind of wait and see on that.
But they're in the storm right now, right? I mean, this isn't anything unexpected. We talked about this at the start of the season, that this is going to be a really grueling 7-week stretch, to get to that bye week in late October. That's not to say that the back end of the schedule will be easy. I mean, Missouri just took Georgia down to the wire. LSU and Ole Miss are both playing really well. Liberty, I think has got the potential to come in and give you a scare. Auburn's no pushover. There's not it's like an NFL schedule. It's you win in the NFL, congratulations, turn around in 7 days and do it again. And that's what you're asked to do in the SEC, especially when you're playing an out-of-conference schedule like Arkansas is playing. I think, sometimes we have a tendency to, be kind of in the storm and not being able to see your way out of it. I don't think the season's over by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think you guys are too either. And I'm not trying to say that, but it is a tough stretch here for Arkansas. And I don't think it's anything that's really unexpected. I think maybe the fact they got to that number 10 ranking early in the season might have set some unrealistic expectations for what the season really was going to be like.
Yeah, I think that's fair too. Like we came into, as soon as the Missouri State game was over, you saying to yourself, we got through 2 pretty good teams to start the season, got a scare in week 3, and now the real schedule's like the toughest part of your schedule starts. And I think a lot of people, including myself, expected Arkansas to beat Texas A&M. And I think, I don't know if pessimism started to set in after that, but it's kind of, Arkansas loses a close game in Arlington to Texas A&M. I think people start to feel kind of some of those same feelings from several years ago, and then the recurring issues with the secondary and stuff like that. I'm just not sure that a whole lot of people see much optimism. But it is definitely a coaching staff that is different from those in the past in terms of, they can get a team to refocus and keep hope and instill belief in those guys that they can still go compete. Is like BYU and Mississippi State are both ranked teams, but BYU has shown that they're capable of maybe not playing their best always on Saturdays. Like Alabama, I think, beat Utah State by 55 points, and then BYU was struggling with them last weekend. So they're definitely beatable. But first, you got to get through Mississippi State, which is they're rolling. pretty good right now since that loss to LSU. I think it was really impressive last week what Mississippi State did to Texas A&M, hanging 42 points on the Aggies defense. When Arkansas, outside of those two of their first three drives in that game, were pretty much held out in terms of scoring.
Arkansas should have beaten A&M. They outplayed A&M. So now you got to go back and, you got to go down the road somewhere and find somewhere to get that game back, so to speak. You got to win a game that people may not expect you to win. I don't know where that is, or Mississippi State this weekend. I guess that's one. It was probably a toss-up game in the preseason, and Mississippi State's a favorite going into the game this week. I think there are some positives that you can – well, let me back up. I think when you play Alabama, it's like looking at yourself in a 4K camera, right? I mean, not very many people have a 4K camera, but if they're able to put one on you, it exposes everything, every little blemish. And playing Alabama, it's going to do that to you. Playing Georgia, it's going to do that to you. Probably put Ohio State, maybe Clemson in that boat. There aren't very many teams though that are there. And so I think there are some positives that you can take away from the Alabama game. I think the fact that Arkansas fought back in the game was a really good sign, because it would have been really easy just to fold up tent and not play hard in the second half after falling behind 28-0 against Alabama. And I can't help but notice kind of the similarity in where the game started and the game Arkansas played on the first weekend of October last year down at Georgia. It felt, very similar in that, they were just trying to hang on against a much, much better team. Against Georgia, there never really was that fight back. Against Alabama, there was. Now, I guess it remains to be seen whether this year's Alabama team is as good as last year's Georgia team. I think it's probably a pretty fair comparison between the two. But the fact that they were able to fight back and even make it a game into the fourth quarter, I thought was a step in the right direction for this program when you compare it against the Georgia game from a year ago.
Yeah, I think so too. Like, there's definitely a few positives there. I think I mentioned earlier, I think Ketron Jackson is a guy who is becoming a guy. I think in fall camp, Sam said Monday that, Ketron at a certain point in the preseason was a starter, and then Matt Landers beat him out, and Ketron didn't sulk, he didn't pout, didn't get down, and he just like kind of kept his head down and kept working. And he got presented an opportunity last Saturday, against, I would imagine, I don't know if it's the same kind of ball hawking secondary that Alabama's had in the past, but, won some one-on-one battles against some really talented guys. And, Ketron, through the first 4 or 5 weeks wasn't a guy that was getting just a whole lot of run. He was mainly in there for, running type downs, where he could be a perimeter, blocker for whoever was springing runs on the outside the numbers. And then he was in there for like the occasional deep ball pass or a quick screen. He had a touchdown against Texas A&M. He had a deep ball, I think, against Missouri State. And so I think there's positives to take away from that. And that, he kind of showed that he's got the potential to be a guy and, maybe one of the top guys in Arkansas's receivers room. And then I think you really like Rocket. He ran for 100 yards again. In the past, that would have been like one of our top stories on our website, that an Arkansas back ran for 100 yards against Alabama, but it's Rocket, and I think we've kind of come to expect that from him. And then I think in terms of on the defensive side of the ball, I think Dwight McGlothern is showing that he's one of Arkansas's top players just overall on defense. I think it's him and Drew Sanders and Bumper Poole who are really standing out right now. And he's got legit ball hawk abilities too at cornerback. And we saw that several times on Saturday. And then he's got that swagger, where he knocked the ball away on a deep pass, and then he kind of like mockingly jogged back with the Alabama receiver. That's something that Arkansas's defensive backs and corners haven't had in a really long time. And he's just playing with a lot of confidence, I think. And that's those kind of performances, even though he didn't come away with a pick or a pick six or anything like that, you can build confidence on that. And I think he's really ready to get tested against Mississippi State. He better be ready, because there's definitely going to be some balls thrown his way.
Yeah, I think something that really disappointed Arkansas fans during that Alabama game wasn't not necessarily the secondary, because I don't think anyone expected their secondary to really contain Bryce Young. But I think it was the offense. And you look at the drive chart, and they punted on or five of their first six drives. They only ran the three and outs. They only ran one drive, only had more than 5 plays in that span. And so I think if you expected Arkansas to hang in that game, you expected it to be a shootout in which the offense was able to keep pace with Alabama's and maybe end up scoring last for a win. And that just didn't happen. And I think that was probably the major letdown from that Alabama game. But like you guys said, they did show some life in that third quarter. But other than that, it was pretty barren.
If there was maybe one disappointment for me in terms of Arkansas's defense, like beyond the secondary, I think that it was the fact that Jalen Milroe came into the game and Arkansas's run defense was still, kind of guessing as to what was coming. Like I think Bryce Young threw for 173 in the first quarter of that game. And I'm trying to figure out what his game log was. Yeah, he threw for 173. Threw for 173 in the first quarter. And I think Alabama finished with a little bit, it might have been somewhere around 240 or 250 passing yards. And so there's like 75 passing yards in the final 3 quarters of the game. And Arkansas's defense just acted like it didn't know that the run was coming, and it couldn't fit gaps. It couldn't, tackle, effectively. And that allowed, Jahmyr Gibbs to go for, basically 150 yards on 2 carries. It's just, and then Milroe had another 70-yard run. I think that was the kind of the defensively, outside of the obvious. I think that was maybe what was most disheartening to me, is just that they knew the run was coming, or the Alabama's offensive game plan had shifted with this backup quarterback more to like base offense type stuff, and Arkansas still struggled with it.
I'm glad you said Rocket Sanders, because that was another thing that I had written down here that I was really impressed with. And not just him, but it was Arkansas's ability to move the Alabama defensive line back on occasion, because we've seen so many games where the Razorbacks have played against an elite defensive line. And I assume Alabama has an elite defensive line. I know they've got the prospects. We'll see, what the stats bear out by the end of the season. But, we've seen them against those types of players where they haven't been able to move them off the line of scrimmage, and they haven't been able to block them. And you've ended up with a lot of negative yardage plays. There were some of those on Saturday, but there were also wins along the offensive line. And I think that's another area where you can look at and say, hey, they're taking steps in the right direction. If you can blow Alabama off the line of scrimmage, or at least move them backward, you're going to be able to do that when you play Mississippi State and BYU and Auburn and these teams coming up later on down the road. And so I think that's another positive that you can take away from the weekend. And then, just to play a Drew Sanders, I'm so impressed with him. And I feel like if you're Pittman and Odom and the coaching staff, and you're trying to build a defense, Drew Sanders is your prototype. Okay, it's like, now we found the type that fits what we want to do. Let's go find more like him. I know they don't just grow on trees, but let's go find more players like Drew Sanders. That's going to be the type of linebacker that I think you see them really trying to evaluate and target in their recruiting efforts moving forward.
Yeah, if you can go out and get the types of guys that Alabama wants, I think that's going to be obviously a definite plus for your program. Drew's freaky, and it's not surprising, anytime he goes out and has 10 plus tackles in a game, breaks up a pass, records a sack. He had the only sack in the game in the first quarter. And we all talked about how big of a key it was for Arkansas to get home on Bryce Young, or it was mainly Bryce Young, but whoever was at quarterback for Alabama, you had to put some pressure on them. And Drew was the only guy that was really able to do it. I think Arkansas really only had 3 quarterback pressures in the game, which was that was a little bit surprising. I thought Arkansas would have some more success with its front 6 or 7 there. I just think, like, going back to maybe some of the positives that you might be able to take away, looking at CFB stats and Arkansas's splits in conference games, Arkansas is averaging 4.2 yards a carry and has 8 touchdowns in 3 conference games. I think that 4+ yard mark per carry, I think you really like that in conference play, don't you? I mean, I know it's a little bit down probably from last year when Arkansas averaged like probably over 5 yards a carry as a team, but I think there's something to build on with that. And I think those numbers could rise in the weeks ahead, if Arkansas just gets a little bit sharper with its passing game. Because I think right now Arkansas's run, I'd have to go back and double check this, but Arkansas's run, they had 51 runs last week, 54 against Alabama, 65 against South Carolina. That's a lot of turning around and handing the ball off in the SEC. And Sam just said after the game last Saturday and again on Monday that they've got to get a little bit better throwing the ball, catching the ball, getting open at receiver. So I think if the passing game, maybe takes a slight step forward, that'll probably lift Arkansas's run game as well.
One more area where we've seen Arkansas improve in the last couple of weeks is in penalties, just 6 for 30 yards against Alabama. I think if you ask the coaching staff, they would say 6 penalties are too many. But when you're talking about 6 5-yard penalties, that's a lot better than, all of the 15-yard penalties that they've incurred in some of these other games. The Whole Hog Football Podcast is sponsored by Kindle King, design, displays, signage, kindleking.com. That's KENDALKING.com.
The Kindle King Group family of companies plays to win, just like our hogs. We know how demanding retail marketing is today. From digital omnichannel creative services, through in-store signing and displays, and finally to social influence, we've got you covered. Our KKG Inc. family of companies, Kindle King, Shopcart Creative, and Soapbox Influence are winning with multiple retailers and brands. We play to win and will be a winning partner for all your retail marketing service needs. Go Hogs!
WholeHogSports.com has the largest, most experienced staff of reporters covering sports in Arkansas. Football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. You'll find it at WholeHogSports.com. The website includes up-to-minute news, daily commentaries, and award-winning photography from the staffs of Hogs Illustrated and the Democrat Gazette. For subscriptions, call 1-800-757-6277. That's 1-800-757-6277. Or visit us online today. WholeHogSports.com.
Want more coverage of your home team? Download the Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Check out the Fan Zone and get up-to-the-minute videos, podcasts, and features on football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. Search for Whole Hog Sports on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire at home. And take it with you on the go by downloading it for your mobile device in your app store. The Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Get it today. Welcome back to the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
We hope you'll join us at the Hogs Illustrated Sports Club for our next meeting. It'll be October 12th. That's next Wednesday, when Hunter Yurichek will come speak to our group at the Hilton Garden Inn off of Weddington Drive in Fayetteville. For more information, nwadealpicky.com. Atmosphere was great for Arkansas, Alabama. At least at the start of the game, Alabama has a way to kind of deflate you. The interception by Dwight McGlothern got the crowd back in it after Bama had moved the ball down the field on that first possession. And then it's hard to kind of stay in the game when it's 28-0. I did think that, the people who had stayed, and I'd say probably what would you guys think? 80%, remained even after halftime. Yeah. They were loud and I felt like they made a difference in the third quarter, especially on that 3-and-out that preceded the fumble on the punt that Arkansas recovered and was able to score a couple of play later and make it 28-23. But Alabama's eventually going to take the crowd out of the game, and they did a pretty good job of that for the most part on Saturday. I do find it's kind of interesting. I was thinking about all of the different sports and the teams they get to host this year. Think about this lineup and I thought about that in relation to the baseball schedule getting announced today. And Arkansas is going to host Tennessee at Baum-Walker Stadium, and that atmosphere is going to be just insane in April. But football gets to host Alabama. They get to host LSU. That's always a great atmosphere. You got Kentucky coming into Bud Walton Arena this year for a basketball game, and you got the baseball team hosting Tennessee. I'd say if you're a season ticket holder for all of those sports, as I know a lot of people are, you got to feel really good about the type of atmospheres that you're going to get to experience in all of those different venues this year.
Yeah, that's another one of those, if that don't light your fire, your wood's wet type situations. Like, those are really good teams, really good programs that I think everybody likes to hate coming to your place, and you just kind of, right along with the team, feel like, you got to protect your home stadium. That Tennessee baseball series is going to be wild, man. It's going to be really wild.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And there's going to be folks lined up for for maybe days outside of the hog pen to get like a halfway decent seat where you might only be able to see half the field. That's going to be really fun. But yeah, there's going to be some really fun crowds, I think, down the stretch of this football season too. You mentioned LSU's coming here, and then you get Ole Miss at home too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, people love to hate Lane Kiffin too. I just hope nobody throws golf balls or ketchup bottles or mustard bottles and stuff at him. Like, it's going to be entertaining enough without all that extracurricular stuff happening.
So here's the question, and a lot of this depends on how the team is doing at that point in the season. I understand that.
Yeah, for sure.
What'll be the better atmosphere? Alabama football, Kentucky basketball, or Tennessee baseball?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they just kind of all stand alone because they're in separate sports. Like, I think that's like about as good as it gets in terms of like opposing home crowd, or in terms of home crowds in those respective sports. Like, I don't think you can get much better than that. In terms of basketball, I don't think, to me, I just don't know that anything's really going to top that Auburn game last year. But, if Arkansas and Kentucky are playing for something at the end of that regular season, it's definitely got the chance to maybe exceed that.
When Kentucky came here for the basketball game a couple of years ago and Calipari got ejected, I guess that was the year that COVID shut everything down.
Eric's first year.
Yeah, it was like 4 weeks before everything got shut down. That was the loudest that I had ever heard the arena, maybe until the Auburn game last year. And, credit to Kentucky, they were able to take the crowd out of it there at the end with the way they finished that game. Great year. I guess we'll get off this subject here, but great year for atmospheres.
Yeah,
in Razorback Stadium.
I think
Razorback events. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the Arkansas home crowd last Saturday did its part. Like, it was loud early in the game. I mean, and the crowd can't help that. Arkansas's defensive backs are struggling to cover slot receivers. Like, they can't help that. It's just kind of their noise volume just kind of is dictated by what's happening on the field. But, like we said, I think 75 or 80% of the people that, at least that we could see from where we were sitting, stayed. And then when Arkansas got back in the game, I mean, it was just as loud, maybe louder than, at any point, maybe in that first quarter early on.
The big story this week is KJ Jefferson and whether or not he's going to be available for Mississippi State. We're not going to know anything about that, I don't think, until Saturday. Whether or not he's going to be ruled out or not. This isn't going to be a deal where they're going to be giving KJ Jefferson updates throughout the week. And I think, we've already seen that over the first couple of days of the week. They're not going to say if he's in concussion protocol. They're not going to say what's going on. Really the only sliver of information that we've been able to glean about Jefferson is that Sam Pittman, after the game on Saturday, said he hit his head and, obviously he didn't come back in for the final 7 minutes or so of that game against Alabama. So if they can't have KJ Jefferson, how much do you think it changes the outlook of this Mississippi State game? Because at least to me, the thought that I have is that Arkansas is probably not going to be able to slow Mississippi State down just a whole lot. Now, again, I had that feeling 2 years ago when they went to Starkville too, and they ended up holding them to 14 points. But I think that was a different, collection of defensive players than what we've seen now. And of course, that was early in Mike Leach's tenure at Mississippi State too. So there was more inconsistency for the Bulldog offense. But I don't feel like Arkansas can slow Mississippi State down very well. And so I feel like in order for the Razorbacks to have a chance in this game, they're going to have to be moving the ball up and down the field. I mean, do you think Cade Fortin or Malik Hornsby gives them, the opportunity to do that the way that Jefferson can?
Yeah, I really don't think so. And that's just based on like what I've seen so far of Fortin. And like, we don't get to see the 2-minute situations that he's, said to have done really well in. And we didn't get to see any scrimmages in the preseason. So basically, like, the only body of work that we have to go off of is the 4 for 10 for 35 yards against a pretty good defense that was, admittedly probably playing second, third team guys, late in the fourth quarter, honestly. And that doesn't, inspire a whole lot of confidence, but I would think that a defense like Mississippi State, which is pretty good and they're exotic and they move a lot and they blitz a lot, I would probably say that it might be on par with like, a team full of like Alabama's third team guys, maybe fourth team guys. That may be a little bit of a stretch for me to say, but it's Mississippi State's defense is good. And I think Sam said as much on Monday. Like, he expects a lot of pressure, and he said that he hadn't seen like a front seven move and twist and just do some exotic things as much as Mississippi State had. I think Arkansas's handled that kind of thing pretty well. And he kind of gave a shout out to Cody Kennedy and the offensive line for, handling that. I'm not exactly sure what Arkansas's sack numbers are in terms of sacks allowed this year, but I don't think it's that many. If it's, some of those numbers can be skewed a little bit by, KJ working himself into a little bit of trouble and just getting tripped up trying to get out of the pocket. I just don't think that Cade Fortin gives you. I just don't think that any of Arkansas's backup quarterbacks give them a great chance to win. And that's just kind of a tough situation to be put in when your starter is a little bit questionable. If anything, I think it makes Arkansas a little bit more run dependent than it is. They may run the ball 70 times this week. If KJ can't play and Mississippi State, kind of ties one arm around Arkansas's back and just, forces them to throw the football because they're stacking the box with 7-8 guys. I don't know. If one of Arkansas's backups has to play this weekend, I think they might be in for a tough one.
It does feel like this is going to be the game where they're going to hand it to Rocket Sanders a lot and say, hey, you need to be the guy who leads us.
Agreed.
You look at Mississippi State's rushing stats. I mean, they average 118 yards allowed per game on the ground. That's about middle of the pack in the SEC. Now, you have to keep in mind that in a lot of Mississippi State's games this year, they've jumped out on teams to where they haven't ran the ball a whole lot because they've been having to pass the ball to try and stay in the game. It happened against A&M the other night. It happened against Arizona in their week 2 win out in Tucson. LSU did have some success running the ball against Mississippi State. That was the only game that the Bulldogs have lost so far. They allowed 207 yards on 38 carries that day. That's about 5.5 yards per carry. And LSU scored 3 rushing touchdowns. So they are susceptible to giving up ground yards. But then again, LSU didn't have the same, situation with its quarterback that Arkansas potentially might have Saturday. Again, we don't know whether or not KJ Jefferson's going to play in that game. You know that he's going to want to play, though, right? I mean, he was so amped up for that game against Ole Miss last year in his first start back in Mississippi. Sardis, Mississippi to Oxford's a lot closer than it is to Starkville. But I think anytime you get that chance to go back and play in your home state, so close to where you grew up, probably against a lot of players on the other side who you grew up playing against in some form or fashion, that he's going to do everything he can to try to get on the field Saturday. It's just probably a matter of whether or not he's going to be medically cleared.
Yeah, I think I walked past his family after nearly every home game in Lot 56. They're there waiting for him. So, I mean, they're clearly invested into him, and I think he'll definitely want to return to his home state and have a good showing. But if he's not able to play, I agree with you guys, and that the offense is going to take a hit. And I think Malik Hornsby would probably give them their best shot at winning, just because I think Cade Fortin might provide a higher floor, but Malik Hornsby gives them a higher ceiling, especially if they're going to lean on the run game. Malik can probably pull the ball and be a lot more dangerous with it in his hands. And I think Mike Leach was actually asked the other day about KJ potentially not playing and how that affects the defensive preparation for them. And he said that it really doesn't change a whole lot because Arkansas can't reteach an offense overnight. And so I think what you're going to see is that they're going to maybe have a more vanilla version of an offense without KJ, but they're still going to run a lot of the same concepts, which would lead me to believe that Malik Hornsby would be the better fit there.
Yeah, I think it would probably be it would look a lot similar to what Alabama did when Jalen Milroe came into the games. I mean, Milroe's probably a fine quarterback in his own right, but he's just not Bryce Young. I mean, that's just kind of the truth about it. And Malik and Cade Fortin they're not KJ. I mean, if they were KJ, they'd be starting over him, or Arkansas would legitimately have a quarterback controversy or a quarterback battle. I would imagine if KJ can't play, they would go to a lot of their base stuff and a lot of things that, both of those guys, feel really comfortable doing. And it could be that Arkansas just, with Fortin being supposedly really good in like those 2-minute situations and those tight, maybe late game situations that they run in practice, maybe you just extend that playbook out a little bit and just have him run like 4 or 5 minute offense. Just over and over again. But I mean, we'll see. I'm no coach, and they probably don't want my insights on a game plan, but that's probably what I would expect to see, is just more base offense.
I think it's going to be really hard to predict this game and how it's going to go because of the uncertainty surrounding Jefferson, and I think that probably contributes to why Mississippi State has opened at such a significant favorite over Arkansas this week. I don't think the season's over for the Razorbacks, in any way. I mean, you get these chicken littles who come out whenever things don't go right for a couple of weeks, and the season's over. I don't know if we'll win next number of games more. I think that there's still a lot of growth that this team can do, and I think you just look back at last year. They lost to Georgia. They lost at Ole Miss in a game they could have won. I mean, you could probably say Ole Miss game last year was what the A&M game was to this year. And then they lost to Auburn in a disappointing game in Fayetteville, but they played UAPB. They got the bye week. They got right over those couple of weeks, and they got hot, down the stretch and played really well in November. I think that's the thing people forget is that, there's still a lot of growth. There's still a lot of development. There's still a lot of learning that players can do in practice, between now and the end of the season. There's still 2 months, plus the potential of a bowl game for these players to get better. And last year shows the blueprint for this coaching staff of you can have this little dip in October, turn things around with that bye week in late October and get things going right at the end of the year. I still think that there's still the potential for a high ceiling for this team. I'm a little bit more apprehensive to say that they might match last year's regular season win total just because of the defensive problems that we've seen. But I think they've got the offense that, if they can score with Alabama, I think they can probably score with just about anybody when KJ Jefferson's in the game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, I think that, Arkansas's got to find a way to, snap back into maybe some of that mental toughness that they really showcased last year, after they got smacked at Georgia. And then, I don't want to say they tailspin, but maybe the most surprising loss that they had last year was that home loss to Auburn. And I think Arkansas maybe had a lead in the second half, maybe at halftime, and just kind of let that game slip away. And you're wondering what direction this team's going to go in. But I just keep going back to this. Like, I think Sam is just so good at pouring belief and into every part of that team. And I think they'll probably, find their identity again. I mean, he could probably go back to 2 years ago when Arkansas, hadn't won an SEC game and God knows how long. What was it, 18 or 19 straight SEC losses they'd had, and nobody was expecting Arkansas to win at Mississippi State. They thought that Mississippi State went to LSU and threw for 1,000,000 yards. They were going to do the same thing to Arkansas, and then Arkansas held them to 14 points. Like, it's a different ball game. Obviously, they were playing in like a 3/4 empty stadium in Starkville that year, but you still went on the road and did it. So you've kind of been there and done that. And I would imagine he's kind of preaching that same thing to them, that our offense may not travel sometimes and our defense may struggle in certain areas, but you can always carry your want to and your toughness on the road. And I think that's just those are the building blocks of his program. I think they're just going to have to carry that on the road with them these next several weeks.
The Cowbells were not wearing masks in 2020.
That's fair.
It's still loud. Trust me. It's still loud in Starkville when the Cowbells are involved. And that's an element of this weekend that we'll talk about later this week when we have Tom Murphy on the podcast. It's interesting how history has the tendency to potentially repeat itself. Arkansas in 2020 and last year in 2021 was unranked and beat a ranked Mississippi State team in Mississippi State's first week in the poll. Arkansas falls out of the rankings this week. Mississippi State jumps in. It could potentially happen a third consecutive year when the Razorbacks go to Starkville. It'll be 11 a.m. kickoff on Saturday morning. Come to WholeHogSports.com throughout the week for all of our coverage leading up to the Razorbacks game against the Bulldogs. And again, we'll be back with another podcast later this week with Tom Murphy to further preview the Razorbacks and the Bulldogs from Starkville. For Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph, I'm Matt Jones. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you later this week.
The proceeding has been a production of WholeHogSports.com. Look for our latest podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast store. And visit us anytime at WholeHogSports.com for the latest news and commentary.